Taylor Swift may have just reached the point where forgiveness is no longer an option, because if the latest claims surrounding Blake Lively are even partly true, this isn't simply another celebrity friendship falling apart. This could be the moment Taylor decided that one of Hollywood's most talked-about friendships was officially over. For years, Blake Lively was considered part of Taylor's inner circle. They celebrated together, they appeared together, they supported each other publicly, and Taylor even allowed Blake to become connected to some of the most private moments of her life. But now, everything has changed. Rumors are exploding that private details surrounding Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce's reported wedding plans were leaked, forcing major changes to what was supposed to be an incredibly private celebration. And suddenly, one question is dominating the conversation. Who did Taylor still trust enough to know those details? Because when you're Taylor Swift, privacy isn't a luxury, it's protection. Every date, every location, every guest list, and every movement can become headline news within minutes. That's why the idea that someone close to Taylor could have allowed sensitive wedding information to reach the public is so explosive. And Blake's name has been pulled directly into that conversation. Even more shocking, the friendship was already surrounded by controversy following Blake's legal battle involving It Ends With Us, where Taylor's name appeared in publicly discussed court materials and messages. That situation reportedly created uncomfortable questions about how Taylor's friendship was being used. Now add wedding rumors, alleged leaks, a supposedly changing guest list, and a friendship that may already have been hanging by a thread. Suddenly, this isn't just about a wedding, it's about trust. And if Taylor really believes someone close to her betrayed that trust, the biggest question isn't whether Blake will attend the wedding, it's whether Taylor will ever let Blake back into her inner circle again. For years, Taylor Swift and Blake Lively looked like the kind of celebrity friendship that Hollywood rarely gets to see. It wasn't simply two famous women occasionally appearing together at an event. Their friendship appeared to exist on a much deeper level. Blake was around during major moments in Taylor's life, and Taylor became connected to Blake's world as well. Their families crossed paths, their names appeared together in entertainment headlines, and their friendship became so recognizable that fans began treating them almost like members of the same celebrity family. That history is exactly what makes the current rumors so explosive. Because when a stranger reveals something about Taylor Swift, she can simply ignore it. When a tabloid publishes a rumor, she can refuse to acknowledge it. But when information supposedly comes from someone inside your trusted circle, everything changes. Suddenly, the question isn't just, who leaked it? The question becomes, who did Taylor trust enough to tell? And that's where this entire situation gets complicated. Taylor has spent years becoming one of the most carefully controlled celebrities on the planet. Her public image may appear effortless, but behind the scenes, almost everything surrounding her major events is carefully protected. That includes her personal relationships, that includes her family, and especially, according to the reports and speculations surrounding her relationship with Travis Kelce, that includes any possible wedding plans. Taylor knows better than almost anyone what happens when private information becomes public. A simple photograph can become worldwide news. A casual dinner can become a conspiracy theory. A private conversation can become a headline. So imagine preparing for one of the biggest personal moments of your life and discovering that information you believed was private may have reached the outside world. That would be enough to make anyone question their entire circle. And this is where Blake Lively enters the story. The two women had been connected for years, but their friendship became even more visible as Taylor's relationship with Travis grew. Blake and Ryan Reynolds were frequently associated with Taylor's social circle. Taylor also became connected to Blake's family, and there were plenty of public moments that made it clear this wasn't merely a casual Hollywood acquaintance. For fans, Blake represented someone who had access to Taylor that ordinary people could never imagine. Someone who potentially knew things before the public. Someone who could be close enough to hear plans before they became headlines. And that level of access comes with something extremely valuable in Taylor's world: trust. But trust becomes dangerous when people begin questioning whether it was respected. The tension became even more complicated when Blake's own professional controversy exploded around "It Ends With Us." As legal disputes and public arguments surrounding the movie became increasingly complicated, Taylor's name appeared in the wider conversation because of her friendship with Blake. And that's where many fans began asking an uncomfortable question: was Taylor being pulled into a situation she never wanted to be part of? Publicly available court documents and media coverage created a much bigger conversation around the relationships between Blake, Ryan, Taylor, and Justin Baldoni. But regardless of which side someone supports in that dispute, one thing became increasingly obvious. Taylor's name was now attached to a controversy that wasn't originally hers. And for someone who has spent years protecting her personal boundaries, that could create serious frustration. Imagine being one of the most famous people in the world and suddenly discovering that your friendship is being discussed inside a legal battle involving another person's professional conflict. You don't necessarily have to be angry at your friend to become uncomfortable. Sometimes distance begins much more quietly. A phone call becomes shorter, messages become less frequent, private meetings become less common, and eventually, the friendship that once felt effortless begins to feel complicated. That's why some observers believe the problems between Taylor and Blake may have developed gradually, rather than through one dramatic explosion. And then there was another name that became important in the story: Keely Teller. Keely and Taylor had also appeared to share a close friendship. She wasn't simply someone who happened to know Taylor. She was part of the wider social circle surrounding Taylor and Travis. The Tellers attended major events. They celebrated Taylor's achievements. They were around during important moments, and that created another dynamic inside Taylor's already complicated inner circle. If Blake believed she was one of Taylor's closest friends, what happens when another friendship becomes just as important? That question matters because celebrity friendships can become surprisingly complicated when fame, access, and loyalty all collide. There is no official evidence proving that Blake deliberately tried to destroy Taylor's friendship with Keely, but rumors and speculation have fueled that theory heavily. And once fans started looking backward, they began interpreting old photographs, missing appearances, social media interactions, and changes in public behavior differently. That is how celebrity narratives grow. One person notices that someone wasn't present. Another notices that two people stopped appearing together. Someone else remembers an old interview. Then suddenly thousands of people are trying to connect those dots. But there is one moment that made the Taylor-Keely friendship rumors particularly emotional. The Los Angeles wildfires. The Tellers reportedly lost their Pacific Palisades home during the devastating fires, a traumatic event that destroyed homes and displaced countless families. For anyone experiencing something like that, losing a home isn't simply losing a building. It's losing memories, photographs, personal belongings, pieces of a life that can never be replaced. And reports about Keely's lost wedding dress made the situation even more emotional. The dress wasn't just an expensive object. It represented a memory, a moment, a piece of her personal history. And when people were already watching Taylor's friendships closely, questions began circulating about whether Taylor had reached out during that difficult period. Again, this is where we need to separate confirmed information from online speculation. There is a huge difference between Taylor didn't publicly post about it and Taylor never contacted them privately. We simply don't know everything that happens behind closed doors. Celebrities can communicate privately without posting anything online. And silence on social media doesn't automatically prove a friendship ended. But the absence of public interaction became part of the larger narrative. Fans noticed that the Tellers appeared less connected to Taylor's public inner circle. Then came the Super Bowl comparisons. In 2024, Taylor's suite included a number of familiar faces, including Blake Lively, and the tellers. The photographs became iconic. Taylor was celebrating Travis Kelce's victory surrounded by friends, celebrities, and people who appeared to be part of her trusted group. But the following year, people noticed changes. The social lineup looked different. Some familiar faces weren't there. And suddenly, fans were asking, what happened? Was it simply scheduling? Was it football loyalty? Were there private disagreements? Or had something much bigger happened behind the scenes? No one outside the people involved can know for certain. But the speculation became impossible to ignore. And then the Blake situation brought everything back into focus. Because the controversy surrounding Blake wasn't only about friendship, it was about boundaries. Taylor had already experienced years of intense public scrutiny. She understood exactly how quickly private information could become a global story. So if she believed that someone close to her was careless with sensitive information, the consequences could be enormous. And that's why the wedding rumors matter so much. The reported changes surrounding the supposed wedding plans created a perfect storm. First came reports about a private celebration, then speculation about the location, then rumors about security, then questions about the guest list, then theories about who was invited and who wasn't. And every new detail created another wave of speculation. For Taylor, this would represent the exact opposite of what she would want from a private wedding. Instead of quietly celebrating with the people she loves, the public would be dissecting every detail: who attended, who didn't, who arrived first, who was missing, who sat where, who posted something afterward, and most importantly, who knew. That question could completely change the way Taylor looks at her friendships. Because when you're preparing for a once-in-a-lifetime moment, you don't necessarily need hundreds of people. You need a handful of people you can trust completely. People who don't need to prove they're close to you. People who don't need to post pictures. People who don't need attention. People who can know something incredibly valuable and simply keep it to themselves. And if the rumors about Taylor's wedding privacy concerns are true, that may explain why the people surrounding her became such a major focus. The bigger her wedding became in the public imagination, the more valuable the information became. And the more valuable the information became, the more important secrecy became. That's why Taylor's inner circle may have been getting smaller. Not because she suddenly hates everyone, not because every friendship was secretly fake, but because fame changes the meaning of trust. When you're an ordinary person, telling a friend your wedding date might be harmless. When you're Taylor Swift, telling someone your wedding date can potentially create headlines around the world. That's an enormous difference. And this is where the alleged Blake conflict becomes so important. If Taylor genuinely believed that Blake had allowed private information to escape, the emotional damage wouldn't necessarily come from the wedding plans themselves. It would come from the realization that someone she trusted may no longer be trustworthy. And once that feeling appears, rebuilding the friendship becomes incredibly difficult. Because trust isn't like a password. You can't simply reset it. You can't erase the history. You can't pretend nothing happened. Even if two people eventually reconcile, the relationship can never be exactly the same. There is always that little voice asking, can I tell her this? Will this stay private? Who else will know? And for Taylor Swift, those questions could be especially important. Because she doesn't just have a normal social life. She has an entire media ecosystem watching her. One leaked detail can become 100 articles. 100 articles become thousands of posts become viral videos, and before long, something that was supposed to be private becomes entertainment for millions of people. That's why the alleged breakdown with Blake isn't just another celebrity friendship story. It's potentially about something much bigger: control. Taylor has spent years taking control of her career, her music, her business, and her public narrative. But when it comes to private relationships, control becomes much harder. You can control what you post. You can control what you say. You can control your own team, but you cannot completely control what another person does with information you've trusted them with. And that's the terrifying part. Because if the person standing closest to you becomes the person you fear the most, your entire inner circle has to be reconsidered. And that brings us to the next question. If Taylor really was furious about the alleged leak, what happened behind the scenes after she discovered it? Did she confront Blake directly? Did she quietly cut contact? Did she change the guest list? Did she increase security? Or was the entire story being exaggerated by people desperate for another celebrity feud? Because until the people directly involved speak publicly, nobody can know exactly what happened. But one thing is undeniable. The friendship that once looked unbreakable is now surrounded by questions. And those questions are becoming harder to ignore. Because the wedding may have changed everything. The biggest question now isn't simply whether Taylor Swift was angry. The bigger question is why the alleged wedding leak happened at all, and why Blake Lively's name keeps getting pulled into the center of the storm. Because if the reports and theories circulating online are even partly accurate, this wasn't just another celebrity rumor, it was a privacy nightmare. Taylor Swift has spent years building one of the most carefully controlled public images in entertainment. Her fans know what she wants them to know, when she wants them to know it. Even major personal milestones are often protected behind layers of security, trusted friends, private entrances, restricted information, and carefully planned announcements. So imagine planning something as personal as a wedding, and suddenly seeing details about the supposed location and timing appear in public. That would be enough to make anyone furious. But for Taylor, privacy has always been even more complicated because every tiny detail surrounding her life can become worldwide news within minutes. And that is exactly why the alleged leak became such a massive talking point. According to the claims circulating online, the original wedding plan involved a much more intimate celebration connected to Rhode Island and the Ocean House. The idea was supposedly simple. Keep everything quiet. Keep the guest list controlled. Keep the location protected. And most importantly, make sure nobody outside the trusted circle knew enough information to ruin the surprise. But then, the details began appearing in public conversations. Suddenly, fans were discussing the location. Then they were discussing dates. Then security. Then possible guests. And before long, the entire internet was trying to piece together Taylor and Travis's supposed wedding plans. Now, here's where we need to separate rumor from confirmed fact. There has been no reliable public confirmation proving that Blake personally leaked Taylor's wedding information. There has also been no confirmed evidence that Taylor cancelled an actual wedding ceremony because of Blake. Those are allegations and theories being pushed around online. But that doesn't mean the story isn't fascinating, because the alleged leak arrived at the exact moment when Taylor and Blake's friendship was already being heavily scrutinized following the legal and public relations drama surrounding It Ends With Us. And that's where the story becomes much bigger than a wedding. It becomes a story about trust. Remember, Taylor and Blake were once publicly associated as extremely close friends. They appeared together. They celebrated together. They were photographed together. Their families and social circles overlapped. For years, fans saw Blake as someone who was comfortably positioned inside Taylor's trusted celebrity circle. But the situation surrounding It Ends With Us changed the conversation. Court filings and public reporting brought private communications involving celebrities into the spotlight, and Taylor's name became part of the discussion. That was uncomfortable territory for someone whose brand depends heavily on controlling when and how she enters a story. And this is where many fans began asking a very simple question. Could Taylor still trust Blake with her most private information? That question became even louder when social media users began connecting the alleged wedding leak with the earlier controversy. Again, there is no confirmed evidence establishing that connection. But the theory spread because the timing was dramatic. And once the internet believes two events are connected, separating fact from speculation becomes incredibly difficult. One rumor becomes another. One anonymous claim becomes a headline. One social media post becomes a supposed receipt. And suddenly, Everyone thinks they know what happened behind closed doors. But Taylor's reaction, or lack of a public reaction, is what makes this even more interesting. She hasn't publicly walked out and given fans a detailed explanation of her private relationships. She hasn't released a long statement explaining who betrayed her. And she hasn't publicly confirmed the sensational wedding claims being circulated online. Instead, the silence creates an enormous information vacuum, and celebrity gossip hates a vacuum. Because when the star doesn't explain what happened, thousands of people start creating explanations for her. Some say Taylor has completely cut Blake off. Others believe the friendship could still be repaired. Some believe the wedding leak was intentional. Others believe it came from someone completely unrelated to Blake. And then there are fans who think the entire story has been exaggerated by social media accounts looking for clicks. That's why the most important thing to understand is this. The emotional story may be compelling, but the evidence has to be separated from the speculation. And there is another layer to this. The alleged wedding leak didn't just affect Taylor. It potentially changed the entire security strategy surrounding the supposed celebration. Think about what happens when information about a major celebrity event becomes public before the celebrity is ready. Security becomes harder, guest movements become harder, transportation becomes harder, venue protection becomes harder, and suddenly, a private event becomes a potential media circus. For an ordinary couple, that might be frustrating. For Taylor Swift, it could become completely overwhelming. Imagine hundreds of photographers, fans outside the venue, drones in the sky, people tracking vehicles, social media accounts posting supposed locations in real time. Every black SUV becoming proof, every helicopter becoming evidence, every celebrity arriving somewhere becoming a potential wedding guest. That is exactly the kind of chaos a highly private celebrity would want to avoid. And that's why the alleged move from an intimate location toward a much more controlled venue became such a major part of the online theory. Madison Square Garden. The name alone changed the entire picture. Instead of a secluded coastal celebration, fans suddenly imagined something massive, enclosed, heavily secured, and nearly impossible for random spectators to monitor. And if that move actually happened, it would represent one thing above everything else: control. Control over entrances, control over exits, control over security, control over cameras, control over transportation, control over the guest experience, and, most importantly, control over information. Because once a celebrity realizes private information can escape through a trusted network, the obvious response isn't necessarily to stop sharing information altogether. It's to reduce the number of people who know, and that could explain why the alleged inner circle changes became such a major part of the speculation. Suddenly, fans weren't just asking, "Is Blake invited?" They were asking, "Who does Taylor actually trust anymore?" That is a much more serious question, because weddings aren't just about romance. They're about relationships. The people standing beside you, the people receiving invitations, the people sitting closest to you, the people who know where you're going before the world does. And if trust has been damaged, a guest list becomes much more than a guest list. It becomes a statement. That's why every rumored omission became headline material. Blake, the tellers, other longtime friends. Every missing face suddenly became evidence of a supposed feud. But again, we have to be careful. A celebrity not appearing in a photograph doesn't automatically mean they have been cut off. A person missing from a party doesn't prove a friendship ended, and a rumor about a guest list isn't the same thing as an official invitation list. Still, the speculation tells us something important about how the public views Taylor's inner circle. People are fascinated by it because Taylor has repeatedly transformed friendship into part of her cultural mythology. Her famous squad became a phenomenon. Her friendships became part of the story. Her concerts became gatherings. Her birthday parties became news. Her appearances with famous friends became social media events. So when one of those relationships appears to fracture, fans don't see it as an ordinary friendship ending. They see it as a chapter closing. And that's exactly what happened with Blake. For years, the friendship appeared strong from the outside. Then came the legal controversy. Then came the private messages. Then came questions about whether Taylor was being dragged into someone else's conflict. And finally came the wedding leak theory. Whether these events are actually connected remains unproven, but the perception is powerful. And perception is everything in celebrity culture. Because once people start believing someone has violated your trust, rebuilding that relationship becomes much harder. You can apologize, you can explain, you can release statements, but you can't erase the feeling that someone knew something private about you and allowed it to become public. And that's the fear behind this entire story. Not the wedding itself, not the venue, not even Blake. Trust. Because if Taylor really believed that someone close to her had leaked private wedding information, the damage wouldn't end when the venue changed. The damage would continue inside the friendship. Every future conversation would carry another question. Who else knows? Who told them? Who can I trust? Who is repeating what I say? Who is taking screenshots? Who is talking to the press? And once you start thinking like that, even your closest circle can suddenly feel dangerous. That is why this story has become so explosive. Because if the allegations are false, someone has created an enormous scandal around a private wedding that may not even have happened in the way described. But if there is some truth behind the privacy breach, then Taylor would have every reason to completely rethink who gets access to her personal life. And Blake's position in that equation becomes one of the biggest questions surrounding the entire saga. Was she really responsible? Was someone around her responsible? Was the information obtained from another source? Or did the internet simply connect two unrelated controversies because the story was too irresistible to ignore? Right now, nobody outside the people directly involved can say with certainty. And that's exactly why the next chapter could be even more explosive. Because once the public starts investigating a celebrity friendship, every old photograph gets re-examined, every old interview gets replayed, every social media post gets analyzed, every missing birthday message becomes suspicious, every unfollow becomes proof, every public appearance becomes evidence, and suddenly, a friendship that may have been quietly changing for months becomes the center of a worldwide guessing game. But there is one thing Taylor Swift knows better than almost anyone. Silence can be powerful. And if she really is angry, she may not need to say a word. The guest list could say it. The seating arrangement could say it. The people standing beside her could say it. And the people missing from the room could say even more. Because when the biggest pop star on the planet celebrates one of the most important moments of her life, everyone will be watching not just the bride and groom, but the people standing behind them. And that is where this story gets even more complicated. Because Blake Lively may not be the only friendship under the microscope. The alleged fallout involving other members of Taylor's former circle raises an even bigger question. How many relationships have already changed behind the scenes, and how many fans simply haven't noticed yet? But the biggest question now isn't whether Taylor Swift is angry. The bigger question is, who does Taylor still trust? Because if even the people who once stood closest to her can suddenly become part of a controversy surrounding her most private plans, then Taylor has a serious problem that money, security, and fame cannot completely solve. And this is where the Blake Lively situation becomes much more complicated. For years, Blake and Taylor appeared to have one of Hollywood's strongest celebrity friendships. They were photographed together. Their families crossed paths. Their children were connected. Taylor even incorporated Blake's family into moments surrounding her career. From the outside, it looked almost unbreakable. But the problem with celebrity friendships is that the public usually sees the photographs, not the conversations happening behind closed doors. And once trust begins disappearing, those photographs can become meaningless. That is why the alleged wedding leak has created such a massive reaction. If Taylor truly believed someone close to her had exposed private information about her wedding plans, the emotional damage would go far beyond one cancelled venue. It would force her to question every conversation, every phone call, every private message, every person who knew the original location. And suddenly, the guest list itself becomes a security issue. Think about that. A wedding guest isn't just a guest when you're Taylor Swift. A guest could potentially know the date, the location, the transportation arrangements, the security plan, the people attending, the schedule, the private entrances, the after party. Even the smallest piece of information could become a headline within minutes. And that's exactly why Taylor's alleged reaction is so important. Instead of simply changing one detail, the entire strategy reportedly shifted toward maximum privacy. The beautiful outdoor setting became questionable. The original plans became unstable. And suddenly, the idea of using a massive enclosed venue made much more sense. Because Madison Square Garden isn't simply another event space. It is a fortress compared with an exposed beachfront property. There are controlled entrances, restricted access, private loading areas, security checkpoints, and most importantly, fewer opportunities for outsiders to casually watch what is happening. That would give Taylor something she desperately needs after a supposed leak: control. And control has always been one of the most important things in Taylor's world. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. If Taylor really believes Blake betrayed her, why would she even consider allowing Blake anywhere near the wedding? That's the question fans keep asking. And there are two completely different possibilities. The first is that Blake is genuinely finished. No invitation, no private reconciliation, no second chance, just silence. And if that is true, then the absence of Blake could become one of the biggest stories surrounding the wedding itself. Because everyone would notice. Every celebrity wedding has people whose presence tells a story. If Blake isn't there, people will immediately ask why. Was she banned? Did Taylor cut her off? Was there a private confrontation? Did the friendship finally collapse? Or did something happen that the public still knows absolutely nothing about? But there is another possibility. What if Taylor hasn't completely closed the door? What if there was a private conversation between them that nobody knows about? What if Taylor decided to forgive Blake, but not trust her? Those are two very different things. You can forgive someone without giving them access to your life again. And that distinction could be incredibly important here. Because even if Taylor and Blake eventually appear together in public, that doesn't automatically mean the friendship has returned to what it was. Hollywood has perfected the art of the public smile. Two people can stand beside each other, laugh for photographers, hug for the cameras, and still have completely separate lives behind the scenes. That's why the wedding guest list could become the ultimate test. If Blake is absent, the message would be obvious. If Blake appears, people will immediately analyze every interaction. Does Taylor hug her? Does Blake stand near Taylor? Are they seated together? Does Taylor introduce her to Travis? Does Blake appear in the private photographs? Or does she remain somewhere far away from the bride? Every tiny movement would become evidence for fans trying to figure out what happened. And then there is the Keely-Taylor situation. That friendship may actually tell us something even bigger. Because Taylor's alleged fallout with Keely wasn't created by one dramatic public confrontation. Instead, fans noticed the distance, fewer appearances, fewer interactions, less public support. And eventually, the two women simply stopped looking like the close friends they once were. That kind of friendship ending can be even more painful because there is no single moment when everyone can point and say, "That's when it ended." Sometimes friendships don't explode. Sometimes they disappear, and when someone as famous as Taylor Swift loses a friendship, the entire internet starts looking for clues. Old photographs suddenly become evidence. Old interviews become evidence. Missing appearances become evidence. A social media like, or the absence of one, becomes evidence. And that's exactly why this story has become so addictive for fans. People aren't just watching a wedding rumor, they're watching a celebrity inner circle potentially rearrange itself in real time. And there is one uncomfortable possibility nobody can ignore. What if the wedding drama isn't actually about Blake alone? What if Taylor has reached a point where she simply doesn't want such a huge circle of people knowing her private business anymore? Because after years of global fame, Taylor may have learned something extremely important. The more people who know a secret, the less likely it is to remain a secret. That could explain why the alleged celebration became increasingly private. It could explain the heightened security. It could explain the carefully controlled guest list. And it could explain why the people who remain closest to Taylor are reportedly those she believes can keep personal information completely private. At that point, loyalty isn't about posting a birthday message. It isn't about appearing in photographs. It isn't about attending every concert. It's about knowing something incredibly valuable and refusing to sell it. That's the currency of Taylor's inner circle. And if the wedding leak really happened through someone close to her, then that currency just became more valuable than ever. Because Taylor isn't simply protecting a wedding anymore. She's protecting the last part of her life that fame hasn't completely consumed. Her privacy, her trust, and her ability to decide when the world gets to see her. Which leaves us with the question that could determine everything moving forward. If Taylor Swift really believes Blake Lively crossed the ultimate line, is there any way back? Because once someone proves they can expose your biggest secret, rebuilding trust becomes almost impossible. And if Blake isn't inside that wedding venue when the doors finally close, fans may finally have their answer. And now we reach the part of this story that could completely change how everyone sees Taylor Swift's inner circle. Because the wedding itself may no longer be just about Taylor and Travis. It could become a public test of who survived the friendship fallout. Think about the symbolism. Taylor walks into the biggest celebration of her personal life, surrounded by hundreds, or potentially thousands, of people. Celebrities, family members, industry friends, old friends, new friends. People who have been there since the beginning, and people who only became close after Taylor reached unprecedented levels of fame. But somewhere inside that crowd, there could also be empty spaces. People who once seemed impossible to separate from Taylor may suddenly be nowhere near her. And those absences could speak louder than any statement. That's what makes the alleged Blake Lively fallout so fascinating. Because Blake doesn't need to say anything publicly for people to notice the distance. If she isn't photographed with Taylor, people will notice. If she isn't seated near the bride, people will notice. If she doesn't appear in the private celebrations, people will notice. And if she doesn't attend at all, the speculation could become enormous. But Taylor has another problem. Even if Blake is completely removed from the guest list, that doesn't erase what allegedly happened. The damage to Taylor's trust would still exist, and that's something money can't fix. A new venue can replace an old venue. A new security plan can replace an old security plan. A different guest list can replace an earlier guest list. But trust? Trust doesn't have a replacement. Once you start wondering whether someone close to you might reveal private information, every conversation becomes different. You start thinking twice before sending a message. You hesitate before sharing a location. You stop discussing plans in group chats. You wonder who might repeat something. And suddenly, the people around you aren't simply friends anymore. They're potential security risks. That's an incredibly lonely position to be in, especially for someone whose entire life is already being watched. Taylor has spent years trying to create boundaries between her public identity and her private life. She can perform in front of tens of thousands of people. She can walk onto enormous stages. She can release albums that become global events. But none of that means she wants strangers knowing what happens inside her home. And a wedding is perhaps the most personal event imaginable. So if private wedding information really did escape before the celebration, it's easy to understand why the alleged reaction would be so intense. The real issue isn't simply who leaked the location. The deeper question is, who did Taylor believe she could trust? And that changes everything. Because if the person responsible was actually someone inside the circle, then Taylor doesn't simply need better security. She needs a new circle. That's why the people remaining closest to her could become more important than ever. The friends who don't need constant access. The friends who don't need publicity. The friends who don't turn private moments into public stories. The friends who understand that being Taylor Swift's friend isn't an opportunity. It's a responsibility. And that distinction could determine who remains in her life after the wedding. Meanwhile, Travis Kelce's role in all of this is equally interesting. Because while most of the drama revolves around Taylor's friendships, Travis is entering a marriage with someone whose private life is essentially a global industry. Every decision surrounding their relationship can become news. Every photograph can become a headline. Every guest can become a theory. And every rumor can create another wave of attention. For Travis, the wedding isn't simply about marrying Taylor. It's also about entering the most intensely scrutinized personal life in entertainment. That means he has to deal with something most couples never experience. The possibility that people around them may have incentives to reveal information. Some people want attention, some want relevance, some want headlines, some want proximity to fame, and some may genuinely believe they are helping. But from Taylor's perspective, the result is the same. Her private life becomes public, and that's exactly what she has been trying to avoid. So the alleged move toward a massive, controlled venue makes strategic sense. Instead of trying to hide a small location from the world, why not create an environment where access itself is controlled? Instead of hoping nobody sees anything, create a situation where nobody can get close enough to see anything. Instead of trusting dozens of people to protect a secret, limit the number of people who actually know the details. That is how you take back control. And if Taylor really did make those changes, because she no longer trusted people around her, then this wedding may represent something much bigger than a marriage. It could represent a reset, a new chapter, a new definition of friendship, a new boundary between Taylor's private life and the celebrity world surrounding her. And that brings us back to Blake, because if Blake is excluded, she won't just be missing from one wedding, she could be missing from an entire chapter of Taylor's life. That's a massive difference. There is also the possibility that Blake tries to repair the relationship. Maybe through a private apology, maybe through mutual friends, maybe through a carefully arranged public appearance. But even then, the biggest obstacle wouldn't be Taylor's anger. It would be Taylor's memory. Taylor doesn't need to forget what happened in order to move forward. And if the alleged betrayal involved something as personal as her wedding plans, forgetting may be impossible. The question isn't whether Taylor can forgive. The question is whether she can trust Blake with something important again. And those are completely different questions. You can forgive someone and still never give them your house key again. You can wish someone well and still remove them from your inner circle. You can stop being angry and still decide that the relationship is over. That may ultimately be the fate of this friendship. Not a dramatic public fight. Not a screaming match. Not some explosive confrontation. Just distance. Permanent distance. And perhaps that's exactly what makes it so painful. Because the friendship once looked so powerful. Two enormously successful women. Two families connected. Years of memories. Shared experiences. Public support. And then suddenly, silence. That's the kind of ending fans have difficulty accepting. They want a reason. They want a final confrontation. They want someone to admit what happened. But celebrity friendships rarely give the public that kind of closure. Instead, people notice the empty seat, the missing photograph, the unfollow, the absence from a birthday, the missing invitation, and eventually, they understand. Something changed. And maybe the most important lesson from this entire situation is that fame doesn't necessarily make relationships easier. It can make them harder. Because when you're famous, you don't always know whether someone loves you for who you are or loves being close to what you represent. Taylor has spent years navigating that problem. And if the current rumors are even partially accurate, this wedding may be the moment she finally draws the line. Not everyone who was once close will remain close. Not everyone who helped create the memories will be invited into the future, and not every friendship is meant to survive every chapter. So as the alleged wedding celebration approaches, fans aren't just going to be watching Taylor walk down the aisle. They're going to be watching the guest list. They're going to watch who stands beside her. They're going to watch who is missing. And most importantly, they're going to watch whether Blake Lively appears anywhere near the bride. Because if she doesn't, that silence may say everything. But even after the ceremony, the story won't necessarily be finished. Because once Taylor and Travis officially begin their next chapter, the real question becomes, what happens after the wedding? Will the friendships that survived become stronger? Will the people who were pushed away attempt comebacks? Will old alliances return? And will Taylor finally address any of this publicly? Those answers could determine the next major chapter of this entire celebrity saga. And there is one final piece still missing: the aftermath. What happens when the cameras stop? What happens when the guests leave? What happens when Taylor and Travis return to their private lives and the wedding headlines finally disappear? That's when we'll find out which relationships were real and which ones were only surviving because the spotlight was still shining. So after everything we've just broken down, one question remains. Is Blake Lively really out of Taylor Swift's inner circle for good? Because if the rumors surrounding the alleged wedding leak are true, this wasn't just another celebrity disagreement. It was a test of trust. Taylor reportedly had to reconsider who knew her private plans, who she could rely on, and who deserved access to one of the most important moments of her life. And that's why this story has become so much bigger than one wedding. It's about friendship. It's about loyalty. It's about what happens when the people closest to you become part of the very drama you're trying to escape. Maybe Blake and Taylor will eventually repair their relationship. Maybe they'll never speak again. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. But one thing is certain: fans will be watching every single clue. Who gets invited? Who disappears? Who stands beside Taylor? And perhaps most importantly, who doesn't? Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Taylor Swift could actually forgive Blake Lively after everything surrounding these allegations? Or do you think once Taylor loses trust in someone, there is simply no way back? And what about the alleged fallout involving Miles and Keely Teller? Was that friendship already over for completely different reasons? Or could the Blake situation have played a much bigger role than anyone realizes? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those stories where every fan seems to have a completely different theory. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because celebrity stories like this can change overnight. One photograph can reveal a new alliance. One missing guest can create an entirely new rumor, and one unexpected appearance could completely change everything we thought we knew. So stay tuned, keep your eyes open, and remember, in Hollywood, sometimes the person missing from the room tells you more than everyone standing inside it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.